Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. Today I'm going to bring you a topic that's a little controversial, and it's been a very divisive topic at that between Republicans and Democrats. And so I wanted to bring you this article called Abortion Inc. And it talks about not only the moral issue of abortion, but also the money side that we rarely hear about. So here we go. Abortion Inc. by Dana Kennedy. The two sides debating abortion rights in America over the past 30 years will never agree. One big reason: they're making too much money to ever stop arguing. There's a dirty little secret about the battle over abortion rights in the U.S. It's not about the 6-foot-tall pictures of fetuses carried at anti-abortion rallies, nor does it involve some of the more grisly tales about late-term abortion. The truth? Americans, more or less, have already made up their minds about abortion. A recent Gallup poll indicated that most Americans reject extreme positions on abortion. They favor keeping it legal, but under limited conditions. For example, only 8% support third trimester abortions. Even more telling, the poll, and others like it conducted this year, revealed that the public's consensus has barely budged since Gallup first asked about abortion in 1975. Still, the debate, fueled by the two warring, volatile sides in the battle over abortion, rages on. Why? Here's the surprise. While no one doubts that ideology, whether it is that of the pro-lifers fighting for the sanctity of life, or the pro-choicers battling for a woman's right to control her own body, drives both groups, there's another reason for keeping the abortion issue alive. It's become big, big business. If it were a private enterprise, it might be called Abortion Inc., and the CEOs would be the old white boys who head the loose, right-wing, often evangelically based anti-abortionist networks, and the old white girls, clubby, close-knit Washington, D.C. and New York-based veteran feminists who lead the pro-choice movement. George estimates show at least $500 million in annual funding or gross revenues for the anti-abortion organizations and $660 million for the pro-choicers. If Abortion Inc. were a company, those revenues of $1.16 billion would place it among the top 1,000 corporations in America today. And Abortion Inc. isn't going out of business because it's making lots of money, which is another way of saying that the argument over abortion won't go away. Theoretically, both sides want the same thing: to reduce abortions, says Bruce Robinson, who has studied the abortion battle for a nonpartisan watchdog group, Ontario Consultants of Religious Tolerance, which monitors religious freedom in North America. But you'll never see them agree, mark my words. Dr. Bernard Nathanson concurs. Nathanson, a co-founder of the National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League, performed 60,000 abortions, and then had a change of conscience in 1977 and produced the seminal anti-abortion film, The Silent Scream. Nathanson can picture a solution, but not for at least 50 years, and not because of pro-choice or anti-abortion activists, but in spite of them. Both sides are entrenched, he says. They yell and scream, but they don't give any ground. We've made no progress towards solving the problem at all. In some ways, it's become like the cancer industry. If we solved the problem of cancer or abortion, it would be great, but there'd be thousands of people out of a job. There are so many people with so much vested economically in abortion, it would be a catastrophe for them. When you consider the poll numbers, it's easy to see why neither party is pushing the issue. Republican presidential nominee George W. Bush retained the tough anti-abortion party plank insisted upon by the religious right and named the anti-abortion Dick Cheney as his running mate. But Bush has pointedly de-emphasized abortion in his campaign. Moreover, as politicians' recognition of the middle plurality solidifies, extremists on both sides are losing ground on the front lines of this fight. At noon on a steamy August day in St. Louis, for example, the Reverend Flip Benham, a self-proclaimed former drunk who unsuccessfully urged his wife to abort their twin sons 27 years ago before he found God, was not even breaking a sweat at a demonstration at his anti-abortion group, Operation Save America. Benham's gaze was fixed on a group of men as they removed a tiny white coffin from a black hearse and carried it across the shimmering asphalt and up the steps to a cross. These funerals for fetuses, or preborn children as anti-abortion activists call them, are standard practice for organizations such as Operation Save America, which stages them at rallies around the country. But back when Operation Save America was called Operation Rescue in the anti-abortion activism heyday of the early 1990s, the tiny white coffins were not just symbolic. Usually, each contained the remnants of an aborted fetus, procured, Benham and others claim, with the help of sympathetic employees inside abortion clinics. But at this St. Louis protest, the coffin was empty. Organizers had not been able to find a fetus in time, and though only a few hundred people showed up compared with the thousands at similar rallies a decade ago, Benham was optimistic. "We're hoping to get arrested," he said. Unfortunately for Benham, that didn't happen. After the rally, Benham sat down in the shade and tried to be philosophical about the movement in which he has spent 20 years. He showed off pictures of his twin 27-year-old sons, both baseball players with major league farm teams. He reminisced about his greatest triumphs: converting Norma McCorvey, the plaintiff in the landmark 1973 U.S. Supreme Court decision Roe v. Wade, to Christianity, and baptizing her in 1995. "At one point, I thought we'd end abortion sooner," he said, "but we're looking at this long term now. You don't turn a big ship around on a dime." Eleanor Schmiel, president of the powerfully funded Feminist Majority Foundation, sees danger just around the corner. Like many other pro-choicers, Schmiel contends that anti-abortion activists have become more powerful, if less visible, now that they have moved from showy street activism to mainstream politics. She points out, for example, that Ralph Reed, the charismatic former executive director of the Christian Coalition, is now a top consultant to Bush. And she talks about the 7 anti-choice bills Bush signed into law in Texas, more than in any other state. "The Republicans want the country to go to sleep," says Schmiel. "They want us to think the right to an abortion is safe, and that the anti-abortion movement has lost steam. We are down to 1 vote now in the Supreme Court," Schmiel continues, referring to the recent 5-4 Supreme Court decision overturning a ban on partial birth abortion in Nebraska. 3 of those justices are over 70, she points out, and several have health problems. It appears all but guaranteed that the next president will be able to appoint at least 2, if not 3, new justices. "So many American women think Roe is forever, just because it's the law now," says Peter Montgomery, who monitors the religious right for TV producer Norman Lear's civil rights advocacy organization, People for the American Way. "They take it for granted. They have no idea how close they are to losing their rights." Separating the rhetoric from the often opaque reality of the abortion issue is difficult. One reason: both sides, no matter how pure their ideology, can be somewhat disingenuous when it comes to keeping the abortion controversy alive, because it is so much a part of their identity. The abortion issue has proved to be a source of unlimited fundraising potential, a catalyst for mobilizing more urban voting blocs, and an irresistible platform to personal and political power. "Let's put it this way," says OCRT's Bruce Robinson, "it would be a disaster for both sides if they ever resolved the issue. It's gotten too big to let go." Dallas Blanchard, a University of West Florida sociology professor and author of 3 books on violence in the anti-abortion movement, is even more cynical. "The March of Dimes made the mistake of curing polio," Blanchard says. "Then they chose birth defects, which was smart because they'll never cure it. If they solve the abortion problem, all those bureaucrats would lose jobs, and they'd have to go to work for a living." When Blanchard talks about the bureaucrats, he is referring for the most part to those overwhelmingly middle-aged or older white male conservatives who make up the pro-life movement. The network is made up of some groups that focus only on abortion, others for whom abortion is one of several issues, and a labyrinthine network of fundamentalist Christian churches around the country. Among the biggest organizations are the National Right to Life Committee, which gets about $2 million a year from the Republican Party alone, Focus on the Family, budget $130 million, Campus Crusade for Christ, budget $300 million, the Traditional Values Coalition, budget $13 million, and the Christian Coalition, which launched a $21 million fundraising drive last year. Those numbers alone add up to nearly $500 million in annual funding. And while some of that money may be used to support other causes, abortion is the hot-button issue for bringing in donations. When you consider the hundreds of organizations whose finances are hidden, $500 million is probably a very low estimate of anti-abortion funding. There are hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars flowing through the American body politic, supporting organizations and initiatives for which ending abortion is their sole purpose or part of a broader agenda, says Al Ross, president of the Institute of Democratic Studies. "It's never been clear to me how much Pat Robertson cares about a fetus, for instance, but there are certainly well-meaning people in the anti-abortion movement who believe a fetus is a person. There are also a lot who realize it's a useful issue to get out the vote and build support for a movement for which ending abortion rights is just a means to an end." Frederick Clarkson, a scholar on abortion and an investigative journalist, agrees with Ross. The issue has never been about abortion, says Clarkson. If abortion were outlawed tomorrow, the pro-lifers in particular would have lost an extremely effective mobilizing wedge issue. Every fundraising campaign must have a great Satan to rail against, a Jane Fonda, a Newt Gingrich, and that's what abortion has become. Key players on the pro-choice old white girl side are SMEAL, NARAL President Kate Michelman, and her Executive Vice President Alice Gurmand, National Organization for Women President Patricia Ireland, National Abortion Federation Executive Director Vicky Saporta, and author-activist Gloria Steinem. SMEAL's Feminist Majority Foundation, which spends some of its multi-million-dollar budget on projects in Afghanistan, has been helped in part by grants like a recent $400,000 contribution from a source that a spokeswoman would not name. But in general, sugar daddies are a little harder to come by for pro-choicers, says Blanchard. Sugar daddies may be scarce, but the pro-choice movement still makes money. Planned Parenthood, the largest abortion provider in the country, grossed $660 million in the fiscal year ending in June 1999. That figure represents income from all the services rendered by Planned Parenthood's more than 130 affiliates around the country. About $58 million of that income came from the fees charged for abortions, and between $18 to $20 million of that was excess revenue, in other words, pure profit. Overall, Planned Parenthood made a little more than $125 million in profit in the 1998-99 fiscal year. We've been tracking them since 1987, and they've made money every year, says Jim Sedlick, director of the anti-abortion group Stop International. They're nonprofits, so they invest their profits in stocks. The IRS says it's okay as long as you don't distribute the profit to stockholders and do keep it in the system. They have net assets of $536 million. That's what they have in the bank. We have to raise money to provide services, says Gloria Felt, president of Planned Parenthood. There are no nonprofits that don't try to operate in the black. It's entirely appropriate to charge fees. It's entirely appropriate to include stocks in managing money. If there's an extra dime, it's for providing more services. No individual at Planned Parenthood benefits. An internal memo from Barbara Javecki, president of the Planned Parenthood Association of Southwest Florida, about the budget for a proposed new clinic in 1995 provides a rare window into some of the more pragmatic aspects of the pro-choice movement. The memo outlines the cost or sale of an abortion, $325, the variable cost per sale, $140, meaning what it costs before the markup, and how many abortions must be performed each month in order for the clinic to break even, 9. An abortion is referred to as a unit in the memo, which was obtained by Stop International and passed on to Planned Parenthood for comment. Dravecki said the pages had been spliced to make us look heartless, but she did not deny the accuracy of what George quoted. Those kinds of statistics enraged Judy Brown, president of Stop International's parent organization, the American Life League. If you can convince the public that the killing of a human person is a service provided for your health and welfare, she says, then what you've done is create your own customer base. The article goes on to talk about different churches, Catholic churches and Methodist churches, who have joined in the movement for the pro-life movement, and then goes on to say this. On the day that Reverend Flip Benham was drawing a disappointing crowd in St. Louis, a few hundred miles to the east, a man who has had more luck than most in firing up the abortion debate was driving east along I-80 from Chicago. His destination, for the first time in years, unknown. His reputation in tatters. I'm just taking a year off and letting what happens happen, said Randall Terry, who galvanized the anti-abortion movement as the militant leader of Operation Rescue, storming abortion clinics in the late 1980s and early 90s, waving pictures of aborted fetuses and chaining himself to beds. Terry left Operation Rescue 9 years ago after federal laws like Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, RICO, and Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances, FACE, brought a virtual end to protests and sit-ins at abortion clinics. He launched his own daily syndicated radio show, Randall Terry Live, on which he preached the pro-life gospel and founded a group called Loyal Opposition in order to lobby the legislature in Vermont against gay marriage. But then Terry had his own fall from grace. He left his wife of 18 years, Cindy, amid rumors of his infidelity. The accusations came in part from Terry's own pastor in Binghamton, New York, who formally censured him last year in a November letter that was posted on the Operation Save America website. In July, Terry's radio show was canceled, and he took off to drive around the country. He said he was on sabbatical, which he suggested is an apt metaphor for the entire anti-abortion crusade. Consider it the winter of the movement, Terry said. You look out and see what looks like death. But there are seeds in the ground. Spring will come again. A lot of people with vested interests on both sides hope he's right. This article is a very heated one, as the article points out, and it seems that both people on either side have their minds made up, no matter what new information they receive. A lot has changed since November 2000 when this article was released. It's June of 2023 now, and we have states that are actually trying to pass laws that would basically kill a newborn baby, just leave it for dead. Though it's been 23 years, I still think the majority of Americans are anti-abortion, just in different ways. Nobody wants an abortion. No one wants to see that happen. But people have different ways of going about how that should happen and what the different rights are for the people involved. You have pro-lifers who say that life begins at conception and that an abortion is murder no matter when it happens. And then you have the pro-choice movement who makes abortion into a woman's right issue rather than protecting the unborn. What's crazy is that we hear the extremes of both sides. We hear the pro-life movement, and all we hear about them is that there should never be an abortion under any circumstance. And then we hear from the pro-choice movement that they are okay, or they're proposing legislation to murder babies after they've been born. Most Americans don't like that, and in this article it even says that. There's not many people that agree with the extreme versions of this. And I think if we really got down to it and talked as Americans, instead of screaming at each other, we would find out that we actually have more in common than we think. And it's important to note that nobody wants an abortion. No one is pro-abortion. So that's a good place to start. What are some ways we can eliminate abortions these days? Number one, we can stop sexualizing our children. We can stop putting soft porn in our kids' libraries and letting them read those books and learn about sexuality at a much too young age, thereby creating teenage pregnancies. We can be better parents. We can be more available to our children. We can put our phones down. We can work a little less. Fathers can be present in their kids' lives. We can stop glorifying music like WAP and Sam Smith's Unholy, which was essentially Satan worship. We can educate those who are thinking about getting an abortion on the option of adoption. According to Charlie Kirk, there are 2 million couples waiting to adopt a baby, and there are about 1 million abortions in this country each year. So even if we eliminated abortion, there would still be 1 million parents or couples waiting for a baby to adopt. And there are so many other things we can do as a country to greatly reduce the amount of abortions needed in this country before the act even happens. It's also important for Americans to know and understand that abortion is a money-making business. So these people who are pro-choice, are they really pro-choice, or are they pro-staying in business? It's a question we all need to ask. that does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.